To me, mindfulness is when you can easily distinguish between false desires and real ones. The benefit of pretty much every natural medicine is that it gives you understanding of who you are.
What is up? Welcome to another episode of the Afterlife Insurance Podcast. Now, I feel like I say this pretty much every time, but I am super excited about this episode. I had the absolute pleasure of talking to Tatyana Voloshin, who is the founder of Untitled.com. And this episode is a deep dive into the magical mushroom Amanita Muscaria. At this point, I have met a lot of people in the medicine space, and Tatyana has hands down the greatest level of expertise when it comes to Amanita Muscaria out of anyone I've ever met. I learned so much during this conversation. Tatyana and I talk about a number of different topics, including how to source it, where the best supply comes from, government regulations and the future of Amanita in the US, legality, the physiology, and how it affects the body. She also shares how she's using it with her clients and the people she's working with to help them in a number of different areas in their life. So it's super fascinating to me. I know microdosing psilocybin is huge right now, and nobody's really talking about Amanita as far as I'm concerned and as far as I'm aware of. So this is an awesome opportunity to learn more about a natural medicine that could potentially be growing and getting more popular in the future. So you're going to want to stick around for the entirety of this episode because it is a good one. We go deep on Amanita. So without any further ado, let's get into it. Tatyana, what is alive with you? What's exciting to you? Where are things with you in your life right now?
I don't know where to start. My plate is so full. My heart is so full. It's been a great journey. Currently, what I do, I am a career wellness coach. So it could also be translated as integrative wellness coach, but my emphasis was always on career because this is where most people are experiencing frictions with, right? So anxiety stemming from that place, stress is coming from that place, or fulfillment is also in the same place, right? So I've been a career coach for the past 6 years. I've been running recruiting companies for the past 25 years. And so I started as a recruiter, but then I realized that most of my clients, they needed career guidance, not just help finding them another job, but what do you do once I'm there, right? So how do I go to the next level? Where that next level is? You always need a coach in your corner, especially if you take your career seriously. If you look at elite athletes, they all have coaches. If you look at great artists, great actors, they all have coaches. So the same thing like with my clients, it's actually the dynamic is interesting because about 10 years ago, 5 years ago, when I was starting, it was primarily C-level people, right? So like if you're CTO or CEO or COO, it's obvious that you do need a coach. But today, I am coaching people who just graduated from college. I'm coaching women who are going back to the workplace after hiatus, with children, for example, right? I'm coaching people in mid-level of their career, not necessarily very senior people. I think the understanding came that it used to be shrinks, right? People used to go to shrinks and they used to talk about their childhood, their trauma and all that. But then shrink is not going to give you a direction. Shrink is not exactly your GPS. It's a different persona in your life, right? So it's pretty much like going to a rabbi or going to your priest and consult about your life. You do need this, but a career coach is something completely different. When I started coaching, it became so fulfilling. It became so great to see that you can really make a difference in a person's life, right? But then about 2 years ago, I rediscovered Amanita. I'm saying rediscovered because I'm half Russian, half Ukrainian. So Amanita was always a part of my heritage, part of my childhood upbringing, right? So you sick, here's a little Amanita for you. You need an immune booster, here's a little Amanita for you. You need to come down before your exam, here's a little Amanita for you. It was like, I don't know, it's just a natural remedy, right? So it was just this harmless mushroom. But after getting familiar with pretty much every psychedelic modality I was able to get my hands on, I realized that something was always there. Something was always waiting for me patiently. I used to work with magic mushrooms, with psilocybin, but Amanita is not psychedelic. It's a psychoactive mushroom, like coffee is psychoactive, right? Tea is psychoactive. So the same thing, it's a psychoactive mushroom, but it's not psychedelic. There is a difference. So the main difference is that it works with different receptors. So it works with GABA receptors, and these are the same receptors that alcohol works with, but not other psychedelics. So that's the main difference. So people, when you do microdosing with psilocybin, is great for depression, but most people are not depressed. Most people are anxious. Most people are stressed. What it means is that they have excited toxicity in their brain. The neural activity is so fast. The neurons are running so fast that we cannot get out of that loop. So we constantly in this fight, flight, or freeze mode because too much is happening in our head. And we cannot stop. We cannot say, hey, let me look at this problem from that side. We don't even understand that there are sides. We have like this very myopic vision because we're so stressed out. So we're unable to perceive other signals. It's too much. So anxiety is when too much is happening and you are unable to process that. So first I started on Amanita myself. And there are two different schools of thoughts, American and Russian Ukrainian. And even though America is my country, I've been here for 30 years, but here I have to side with Russian and Ukrainians because they have a centuries old tradition. Amanita comes from Siberia. It's been in that place of the world forever. It probably developed together with humans, right? And then the best amanita still comes either from Siberia or from Carpathian mountains that are in Ukraine. So that school of thought is that you do not need to be on microdosing forever. The way it works, first you need to just pacify your GABA. You need to make sure that you're calm, that you are not being bombarded with signals you are unable to process, that you're unable to, that you're constantly in this scared mode, right? But you don't need much time for that. The program is only 3 months. And then you do a full stop, and then you come back on the ad hoc basis. Ad hoc basis is basically like, I just got back from California. For me, the 3 hour time difference, it's killing me. Every time I go to California, I just sleep nonstop. And then when I finally adjust, it's time for me to go back. So even though I'm not microdosing Amanita on the regular basis now, but I've been taking microdosing in the morning only, and it would give me such a boost of energy that there was zero jet lag, nothing. I didn't feel it. Same thing, like when I feel like, for example, I played tennis 2 weeks ago with 3 women. One of them had COVID. She didn't know about that. 2 others, they got sick. I didn't. Because the moment she told us that she had COVID, I started on Amanita and nothing happened. So it's my little miracle mushroom that I'm really in love with. And for people who don't know what Amanita is, this is the mushroom of Alice in Wonderland, mushroom of Mario Brothers. It's this fancy red with white dots mushroom. It's also the mushroom that originated Christmas, because even if you go to the usforestry.org, you can read a story of how Amanita started Christmas. It's really fascinating because the whole like shamans in Siberia, when they would gather Amanita, they would put it dry on a tree. And this is how your Christmas tree got. And of course, Amanita was taken during winter solstice, which is December 21st. And the reason Santa goes to your chimney, because when shaman was bringing his goodies to his people, they were all snowed in. So the only place he could get into was through the chimney. And the whole thing was Rudolph. Yes, of course, Rudolph also loves the Manita. There's been always a synergy between animals and that mushroom. And yeah, so it's been a part of our culture forever.
This is fascinating to me because right now, currently in our culture in the US, there's been an explosion of microdosing. It's gotten very popular. This is actually how you and I connected initially, was through the psilocybin microdosing channels. And the fact that you are working primarily with Amanita Muscaria, to me, is understanding the fact that you're Russian and Ukrainian, and I didn't know that you had taken it and it was part of your life as you were growing up. That's really interesting to me. And so this isn't a new thing for you. This is as you said, a rediscovery of something that you already had as part of your lineage and something that's been passed down to you through family lines and through your native culture. The fact that psilocybin is getting so big, I haven't heard anybody really talking about Amanita muscaria. And I have to be honest, my perception of Amanita before you and I started talking was I don't mess with it. I've heard horror stories of people working with Amanita muscaria, and like most things, when people have an experience with a psychedelic or a psychotropic sort of substance, it's because they didn't know what they were doing when they were getting into it and they took too much, or the issue is not the substance itself. It's more around the education or understanding around the substance. And that leads to somebody using it in a way that doesn't suit their needs. But with everybody talking about microdosing psilocybin, having connected with you and this rediscovery of Amanita, and it really challenged my perception of Amanita. Like, well, this is really something that's interesting, especially at this point in time when so many people are looking to more natural cures and forms of medicine and modalities that can help them, like you said, soothe their depression or anxiety or whatever it is they're dealing with. And in a way where it's prescribed to them for a period of time to deal with the issue and then they go off with it. I think people in my generation and the younger generations are seeing what is happening with our parents and our grandparents and the older generations. What happens when you get put on a pharmaceutical for extended periods of time, and then first one day you have high blood pressure, and then 20 years later you're maxed out on your high blood pressure medication, and you've never taken a break and you've been on it forever, and it's had negative health effects. So the fact that the Amanita and your history with it is coming back around, and this is an alternative for people that maybe have different sorts of proclivities, and everybody's different. What resonates with one person might not resonate with somebody else, and not everybody's going to get positive results with microdosing psilocybin. I've witnessed that myself. So having an option and having somebody who understands that medicine deeply and has worked with it and can give proper guidance, I think that's super cool. I feel like you're a unicorn in this space.
I think I kind of am because there's several problems with perception of amanita. First one is dosage. And you're absolutely right. It could be extremely scary because if you're not prepared for the journey with amanita, and I'm talking about heroic journeys, not microdosing. Like if you decide to get like we sell microdosing in capsules, half gram each. It's completely legal. It's legal to sell. It's legal to possess everywhere except for Louisiana. Louisiana is the only state. Most actually of natural medicine are prohibited there. Like blue lotus, for example, prohibited. Okay. Yeah. I don't know.
They're cool with Mardi Gras, but natural medicine
Yeah, I know.
is
It's
a
really
no-go.
strange. I think next they're going to prohibit a dandelion or something. It's an interesting notion. How do you prohibit nature, right? Don't grow
Yeah.
that. Okay. But anyway, if you take a bag of capsules, and if you're going to have not 1 gram a day, but if you decide to sit with 6 grams right off the bat, you can get into ayahuasca territory. Now imagine getting into ayahuasca territory when you've never done anything like that, and you're sitting at home on your couch, and suddenly, boom, you're there. You wouldn't even know what hit you, right? It will be extremely scary, and no one ever should do an Amanita journey on their own. It's not the same as psilocybin. It can get you into a very dark space or into a very interesting space. Shamans on heroic dosage of Amanita, they would fly with birds, they would go under the earth. It's a very interesting medicine. It's one of the most ancient ones. They found the traces of Amanita in Ulysses' Mysteries, the place in Ulysses where they did the mysteries, right? The first Greek mysteries. It was a part of Dionysus cult. It was the part of shamanistic cults. It's always been with us, but we need to be respectful to her because you never know what she's capable of. And like ayahuasca, she can be extremely rude to you if you are not ready for her. But microdosing is a different story, of course. Microdosing, one of my clients put it, I really liked it. The feeling is like somebody is just giving you a very soft embrace. This is how mostly people feel on it, right? So it does do several things because it doesn't latch to it, it's wrong. So it mimics your GABA system, right? So GABA are the receptors that are all over our body. These are the receptors that alcohol attaches to, and this is why as humans we like alcohol. But unfortunately, alcohol has lots and lots of side effects, which Amanita doesn't. So what it does, once it gets into your brain, the brain thinks, oh, GABA receptors are firing up. It means that neural activity needs to slow down. So the feeling is, imagine that you've been sitting all your life in a room with a very loud AC, and all of a sudden it turned down. So you experience this mild sense of euphoria, not because Amanita gave you something, but because you stopped processing everything too fast. So you slow down a little bit, but at the same time, it's not like cannabis, for example. It doesn't deplete you of energy, it gives you a boost of energy. So in the morning, when you wake up, you take Amanita first thing in the morning, boom, in 45 minutes, actually, you can physically feel how you wake up. For me, it's 45 minutes. For some people, it's 20 minutes. For somebody, it's an hour and a half. And then you take another capsule right before you go to bed, and it works on you while you're asleep. And of course, Amanita also has the antihistamine properties, and it also works with your digestion system. Amanita is a symbiotic, the main symbiotic of a forest. The reason why it does grow in the United States. People do gather it, but it's not a good mushroom. A friend of mine who runs a testing lab, she did the test on Amanita. It's too high in a botanic acid here in the States. And Amanita has 3 major components, but 2 that are most of interest to us are ibotenic acid and muscimol. So ibotenic acid, and that's another thing where it gets confusing, right? So if you talk to an American company that does Amanita, they mostly boil it. And the reason they boil it, so the ibotenic acid is still being present because it gives you this mild, trippy effect. It does. It's very mild, but it's there. But also it makes the mushroom toxic because ibotenic acid is actually toxic. It's not horrendously toxic. You're not going to die from it. But microdosing with slightly toxic mushroom is the same thing as eating tuna every day. You just don't want to eat tuna every day because you know it's full of mercury. Sometimes a little bit, that's fine. But mushrooms are toxic. And you probably know that like psilocybin mushrooms are toxic too. They're very difficult on your liver. So the cleaner your mushroom is, the better it is for you, right? So another thing is, where do you gather them? If they grow closer than 5 miles to the major road, they're going to mushrooms, they're soaking everything up, right? So they're going to soak up the car exhausts. And the car exhaust, this is where your heavy metals are. So you really need to make sure these mushrooms are not gathered somewhere, God knows where. In the US, it's not a regulated business. You have no idea where your mushrooms were gathered, no idea. In Russia and Ukraine, surprisingly, it is semi-regulated. So actually, people do go to Carpathian Mountains, which are very far from action. They're very far from war, from everything. So people say, go to Ukraine, it's war. How do you do that? But yes, they do it during the war. There are collectives. They gather mushrooms. Then they ask for a government official to come in and test them against heavy metal and traces of other fungi. And then, only then, it gets capsulated and sold. So in Ukraine, they do not boil it. They only dry it. When you dry Amanita, there is no traces of ibotenic acid, zero, which means that the mushroom is not toxic for you. And still, people with as every natural medicine, let's say if your digestion is not, if you have some digestive problems, Amanita can make them, it doesn't make it worse. It's not that. It basically, it does, it's very difficult to explain because you're getting into this spiritual territory. So first we talk about chemistry and then all of a sudden we're in a spiritual territory. So it's a difficult move, but we need to talk about it somehow because even though we don't understand why, empirically we know it exists. So the only way we can talk about it is that, look, Amanita diagnoses your body and then it shows you precisely where the problem is. And it's always the case. Mostly it's about your digestive system, but it can be about your head. It can be about something else because you're getting attuned to your body. Amanita makes you listen and it makes you hear. And because you don't have that noise, you understand something about you. You understand something about who you are, what you need to do, what are your needs, what makes your life, right? So this is what it does. So, but finding a good producer of Amanita in the States is a task I was never able to complete because I've been looking for a producer here for the first year and I tried pretty much everything that's on market. In most cases, right now they're saying it's about 70% of cases that Amanita product that's on American market does not have a trace of Amanita. There was a scandal with diamond shrooms last month, right? So people would get their mushrooms and they would end up in a hospital. And diamond shrooms, so they said, you know what, we're pulling this from because FDA was watching them. So diamond shrooms was like, oh, you know what, we're sorry, but it just came to our attention that there is Amanita in our mushrooms, so we need to pull them off the market. But they made this statement 15 minutes before FDA did their statement. An FDA statement was, we tested those mushrooms. There's no traces of Amanita there. But what it does have, it has that chemical precursor to psilocin, 5-DMT something, this synthetic mushrooms. These are the synthetic mushrooms that were developed by Hoffman after he developed LSD. He developed this molecule and he forgot about it. But people now, they rediscovered it. They started using it again. And when you do chemical compound at God knows how, God knows which lab, you don't necessarily come up with the perfect molecule. It can get turned into anything else. The variance of the chemistry is a fascinating field, right? So FDA found everything. They found ketamine in those chocolates, but they found DMT and 5-DMT oil, which is the synthetic mushrooms, but there were no traces of Amanita. So unfortunately for Amanita, because she's so pretty, people just like putting her on their packaging, but she may not even be there. So it's interesting because it's very difficult to test. Like you cannot buy an Amanita test kit like you can for psilocybin, right? You actually need to send it to your lab. And the lab result every time you need to pay for it, right? So it's expensive to test that stuff. So nobody does Amanita testing like this company that does, I forgot what it's called. They do testing for the festivals. At the festivals, you can bring them your stuff and they test it for you. They have every panel except for Amanita, which is too bad because Amanita is actually great for partying too. People take it with alcohol because it intensifies the effect, or without alcohol. Like I have so many clients who don't like drinking, but they still want to party. So if you don't want to party, like if you don't want to go all hard, but you just want to have a nice evening with friends and you just want to relax a little bit, you do, I call it micro macro. So it's microdosing, but it's like a little bit more than a microdosing, but definitely not a regular dose. So like in between. And it gives you like this party mode. It gives you energy, it gives you euphoria, it gives you outgoing, the feeling of connection. So it's a great, great little mushroom. So my rule of thumb, and this is what I suggest to people, if you want mushrooms, do not buy chocolate, do not buy gummies, go with powder. So Amanita, unfortunately, is not like psilocybin. Psilocybin makes a great tea. Amanita makes a vile tea. The taste, you cannot mask it. I've been trying, been trying, God knows how many vats of honey I wasted. But no, nothing can mask it. So with Amanita, when you take a capsule and when you feel the smell is very strong. It's a very strong mushroom smell and it's unmistakable. You cannot mistake it for anything else. And you can even see, you know how you can see the powder when it's clean. So like the only concern in that case, which becomes minuscule, are the traces of other fungi. But Amanita, again, like you need to trust the gatherers at this point that they know their mushrooms. Amanita is so difficult to mix with something else that at least in no news ever, there was like not a single occurrence that I'm aware of that people would have traces of some deadly mushrooms within Amanita. It's not easy you can't mix it with something else like your Amanita when you see it, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's two things that came up for me, and one was you touched on the sourcing of it. And for me, the research that I'd done about it, or initially because I was interested in it, I'd heard about it. I played the hell out of Super Mario Brothers 3 when I was a little kid, and those like there's always been something with those mushrooms. I researched Amanita, and the sourcing of it seemed problematic because depending on where you get it, the time of the year, like it's not a uniform kind of a thing. And you just confirmed something that I was always worried about or was in the back of my mind, or one of the reasons why I never felt comfortable really going to it or working with it, because I never felt comfortable with the source. And you're spot on about where you do harvesting and gathering of these things is really important. Gathering anything along the side of the road is not a great idea as far as harvesting and picking wild. I'd heard in my research, and people would come to me and ask me about Amanita, and that's what always I would have to tell people is I just don't have a good source for it, and what I've heard, it can be hit or miss. You never know what you're going to get. And that's really interesting that in Russia and Ukraine that they actually test the mushrooms. So as far as I'm concerned, doesn't matter what the substance is, like knowing the source and trusting the source is really important, super important. And the fact that the medicine that you talk about that comes from Russia and Ukraine, and not only is it legal, you can get it shipped here legally, but it's like the quality of it and the consistency of it is going to be of higher caliber. So that's vitally important information for people. I'm glad that I'm learning this and knowing that there are sources out there where you can get it, because from my understanding, Amanita only grows under conifers. It only grows in certain environmental conditions. It's not really something you can grow in a lab or a monotub like you can grow psilocybin mushrooms. They're relatively easy to grow in indoor conditions, and you have a lot of control over the environment. That's one of the reasons why they're so popular and easy to grow, is because of the ease of producing them. With Amanita, it's not the same. You have to harvest them or forage them wild primarily. So that's a really important point for people to understand, that the origin of this medicine is important. Where it comes from, the source of it is important. And knowing that there are reliable sources out there in places where you can get high quality Amanita is really cool and vital. And I think if there's any way to make this a viable product and something that's going to be able to reliably help people, that has to be a foundational element to the supply chain and getting it to people. The second thing that you brought up, and it's something that I think is really important, is the aspect of having permission to work with a medicine on your terms. So you mentioned that some people like to do the macro dose. Maybe they don't like to drink. Maybe every time they use the Amanita is not going to be in some holy ceremony or some specific ritual around a certain astrological event or during a certain phase of the moon. Whether the person that's providing the medicine knows it or not, people are going to be using that medicine how they want to and when they want to. Ultimately, it's up to that person. And understanding the different use cases for Amanita, and where people could, use it in a more of a recreational sense, so to speak, and giving people permission to do that without a stigma and without saying that's wrong or that's not traditional or that's not right, that's not how they used to do it. Like removing those different labels we put on things, from like the good or bad label, from how people use these medicines, and allowing people to have their own experience with it and experiment if they want. The caveat to that is, the more you can educate yourself ahead of time and the greater base of knowledge that you have going into it before your experimental phase, before you do the thing you've never done, before you take the heroic dose, having at least a base understanding and preferably some prior experience with it before doing that thing that you've never done is going to be really helpful in creating a situation where you're able to manage it. So I really appreciate that point of view and your perspective, and giving people the permission to, again, work with this medicine in a way that's going to suit them, and not saying, oh, you have to do it this way. This is the traditional way. Times are changing, and there's a lot of wisdom in a lot of these ancient traditions and the different shamanic practices. And we're moving into a new era, and we are a global community, and we can now get mushrooms that were harvested from the Carpathian Mountains delivered to your doorstep. That's a thing. So I think we need to acknowledge that, and rather than say, no, that's not the way we do it. So like, okay, how can we do what we want to do, and how can we do that in a way that's going to create the best outcomes or reduce harm as much as possible, reduce the amount of freaked out 911 calls and the amount of situations where people get in a little too deep or are in over their head a little bit. Like, how can we minimize that, yet allow people to make their own decisions and be adults and be responsible adults, and let them have their experience?
In that sense, I think Amanita is very close to cannabis, because you need to learn how to work with it. I still would say that heroic dosage is not a good idea, simply because you're not going to die from it. Like, you would need to eat about 8 pounds of raw Amanita mushrooms in order to die. So it's the same as with cannabis, right? You cannot possibly die from cannabis. However, if you're not prepared, I remember one of my very first trips on cannabis about 10 years ago. I became paranoid because cannabis can't do it for you, right? So I became paranoid, and I felt like my throat is closing because there's hair in my throat growing, right? The hair is growing and they're closing my throat and I cannot breathe. So I woke up my husband. I'm like, you know what? We need to go to emergency room. He said, why? Well, because there's hair in my throat and they're growing and it's closing my pipes and I will not be able to breathe. And he's a great sitter. So he was like, yes, I see. We're going to go to emergency room. But right now, why don't you turn from your left side to your right side, and then we'll go. So I turned and I fell asleep, and that was it. Same thing with Amanita. You can get paranoid. But the worst place, obviously, once you're paranoid, the worst place you want to go to is emergency room because it's only going to make things worse. You just need to wait it out, right? So if you go a little higher, especially if you mix, and Amanita loves mixing, you don't need to go heroic dosage. You can just mix micro macro of Amanita with some cannabis, add a touch of tequila. Woo! Even without tequila, Amanita and cannabis together, you can go into a very deep and nice, psilocybin style trip without visions. This is also important because some people, they either don't want visions at all or they just too tired. When you went through all this, like sometimes I feel like I need to think, but I don't want to trip, but I need to go deeper. I need to have a deeper thinking process without necessarily fun visuals because I'm not looking for fun, right? So I've seen visuals. I've seen it all. I've seen beautiful pictures. Thank you very much. But now I need to think about my business plan. What do? I just go deeper without visuals. So I really appreciate that it is such a versatile instrument that you can employ. But at the same time, you do need to be extremely respectful. You do need to understand what it is that you're doing, and you need to listen to your body. So for the first 3 months, this is why microdosing is so great, because you learn in this 3 months, several things happens. You learn how to work with this medicine. You develop this intuitive relationship with it. You actually know whether you need another one or not, because on months 2 and 3, it's recommended to add another half a gram. So you will be at 1.5 grams per day, right? So you would take one in the morning, one when your energy dips around 2, 3 o'clock for most people, and then you take one right before bed. But for some people, when they take Amanita right before bed, they go into a territory of lucid dreaming. And it's so funny. I have some clients who are like, Tatyana, please teach us how to do lucid dreaming. That's all we want. We need lucid dreaming. And I have some other clients that's like, you know what? I'm not going to take Amanita right before bed because it gives me lucid dreams and I hate them. So it's your choice. You can pick and choose. It's your life, right? So it's not dangerous. It's a beautiful thing to have in your arsenal. And then at the same time, you definitely calm down. So anxiety as the main problem of most of my clients, anxiety, stress, and your circadian rhythms too. For people who have insomnia, for people who constantly wake up throughout the night, it becomes much better. So this is why if you want to do self-microdosing, we have a WhatsApp support group. You can ask questions, people discuss their experience, etc. If you want to do it in a group with a purpose, I do career coaching. So basically we cover in this particular group, and I started every month, it's only 10 people. So it's basically a very transformative experience because it could be like one session could be devoted to resume mastery and job searching techniques and career transition guidance. Then another session, and we have 6 sessions during 3 months period. Another session would be devoted to cognitive and professional benefits. Another session would build around exclusive, intimate relationship with your body. It's very important because in the career type of situation, most people forget how to work with their bodies. They don't have access to their bodies, like they're using their bodies, but they're not connected to them. And this actually what stalls their careers because they're too much in their head. So we cover that as well. And then, of course, there is an individual program. When people just come for individual guidance, then the program is tailored specifically for them. So in every program, we have those 6 sessions, and also we have 12 meditative sessions. And this is something that I developed to help people go to a deeper journey without any substances or maybe with the help of half a gram of Amanita. So I lead those holotropic guided meditation sessions weekly. It's every Tuesday. And what we do there, we cover different aspects. For example, it could be working with emotions today. Or like yesterday, I have 2 groups, one in Russian, one in English. I do the one in Russian for Ukrainians. I know it sounds a little weird, but it is what it is. So I have some Ukrainian clients and I do it. Wednesday is my Ukrainian day, Tuesday is my American day. So yesterday we had a session that was devoted to intuition, how to use the intuition, how to harness energy for intuition and all that. And this is an hour and a half program on Zoom. And the way it works, because it's holotropic, people go right there, right? Meditation is hard, especially if you lived 30, 40, 50 years of your life and you have no idea how to meditate. So you sit there in a lotus and then you're like, what am I supposed to do again? Where am I supposed to get? Why? Right? So you don't understand that. But holotropic puts you there. It's like an elevator. Whether you want to or not, it gets you right to the roof. And then on that roof, people like, whoa, that was even possible? Yes, you can do it. And you can do it with the power of your own breath work. So this is like a program that I think it's unique. I don't think anybody else does that because I am a holotropic certified trainer, but holotropic is a great technique, but there are some not concerns, but it just doesn't work for my clients. So it's a very lengthy process, right? It's 2 to 3 hours. It's one-on-one, or you need to gather a group. You need to go there. It's a lot. And I work with people who have zero time. So they do it from their bed at 8 p.m. instead of watching their favorite show once a week, and they release so much. There is a moment when I ask them to scream at the end of the session, and you should see how people like even when I don't see their faces, because some of them they scream in a pillow, like when you're in a city apartment, when you don't want to scare your neighbors, your pets, your children, you scream in a pillow, but still you see how much energy, bad energy is getting released, how much shit is just getting out from them, right? It's the same as cleansing yourself on ayahuasca combo. It's just emotional cleanse, but it's a very powerful purge, right? Emotional purge. And when I do it with people who never meditated, who've been in financial technology all their life, not spiritual, not religious, zero practices, zero focus on their body. And if I tell them, you know what, you need to come and meditate with me before they taste that Amanita, it would be a hard no. It would be just like, no, we're not going to do it. Just give us another Valium or something, whatever it is that you're selling, right? But once Amanita works with them, it starts in a second week. In about 2 weeks, they're ready. In 2 weeks, they start breathing, they come down, they realize that there is more to life, and most importantly, they see the problem as the absence of a problem. It's just a situation. They're able to assess the situation from the top, from the side. They see the whole thing, and it's not that scary beast any longer, and they're not prisoners of their head any longer. Yeah.
That's fascinating. How did you come up with this? Did you come up with this on your own? Specifically the protocol, the half a gram. Is this something you worked out on?
No,
Something you
no,
worked out on
no.
your own?
The protocol, no. The protocol is this. This is, again, there are two different philosophical schools. So I've been working with it for 2 years. 2 years ago, I started working with American mushrooms. I've tried them all. Actually, the best ones were from Minnesota, but they were not stable. Like one batch would be fine, another one not so much. One batch is fine, another one not so much. So first I went with American suggestions. And then I realized that they base their suggestions on psilocybin protocol, which doesn't make any sense because psilocybin and Amanita work completely with different receptors. This is when I realized that I should stop listening to Americans. So I switched to Canada because in Canada, Amanita is not only legal, it's actually recommended by the FDA. It's on the list of recommended substances. And they recommend Amanita first and foremost for stress busting and circadian rhythm regulation. So, but Canada being Canada, they have only one company that they allowed to produce and sell Amanita. And when you go to that company's website, and when you're trying to see what the provenance of their mushroom is, they tell you, we gather our mushrooms in Northern and Southern America. Huh? Amanita from South America? And Europe. So which one is it? It's like buying your wine and it says that, oh, the grapes are coming from South America, North America, and Europe. It's ridiculous, right? So I couldn't trust them and I couldn't see the reason to trust them. So I found this company in Siberia and the protocol was suggested by them. So I started using their product, which was tremendous. It was amazing. I think the best, strongest Amanita comes from Siberia. But with the war and everything, it's virtually impossible to get the shipment from Siberia. It needs to go. I'm not going to bore you with the shipment of wars, but it's a real problem. And it's also a problem with sanctions. So even though I'm not working with government, I'm working with particular people collective. It's tiny. These people have nothing to do with war. They're not Putin, but still it's difficult. So then I was fortunate to find, after many trials, I was fortunate to find an amazing person in Ukraine, and he lives in Kiev, and he's just an amazing human being. He used to be doing VR and AR for schools, for like physics and chemistry, but his partner was killed during the first week of war. And obviously it took such a toll on him that he also, like myself, he rediscovered Amanita for himself. He used to be doing psilocybin trips, psilocybin microdosing that didn't work for him. And then he started microdosing with Amanita right when the war started. So it's almost 2.5 years, right? So, and then he found this collective that already existed in Carpathian Mountain. It's all family based. So it's basically like it's one family and this is family business. As long as you remember, as long as they remember, it's their family business. So their parents, their grandparents, etc. They've been all mushrooming, right? So I started working with these people and he tests his product. He's just an amazing guy. He stands behind his product. And also, you know what? There is a huge difference when you are buying a product, let's say mushrooms, from a company that doesn't have a human face and from a company that does. So if a person put their face in front of it and says, hey, this is my phone number, this is my email, this is all my channels, call me, write to me. If you have any problem, if you have any questions, I am here, I am alive, I'm here for you. Not just to sell you product and forget about your existence, but to help you, to lead you all the way. So he is doing the same thing for his groups in Ukraine. And he's also part of my Russian speaking group here. So he's always there to help. So protocol, when I told him that Siberian protocol is this and this, do you agree? He said, yes, this is exactly what we've been doing. So when you ask Russians or Ukrainians, the protocol is pretty much uniform there. This is what people do. Another part of the world where great Amanita comes from, so I would say number one is Siberia. Number two is Ukraine. Number three, Baltic countries. But in Baltic countries, there is no tradition. The tradition was killed because the church was so stronger. The Protestant church and Lutheran church that existed in Baltic countries completely killed the tradition. So people have different protocols there, but I'm not very comfortable with that. Something is off because it's a relatively new thing, the same as in the States. And then another area where great Amanita comes from, and it's actually not Amanita Muscaria, but Amanita pantherina, comes from Norway. And this is what berserks were having. And this is a very tricky mushroom. It's similar to Muscaria, but it's not. Pantherina gives you, it's almost like a sports doping. And when you go to a gym and you take half a gram, it makes you unstoppable. So you need to be very careful with it. It's like if you run a marathon. I'm a tennis player, so I know that like before the match, I take it. I just need to be careful because it makes me, I think that I am unstoppable. And it's really gives you like this berserk quality, really. But it's just a tiny thing. So it's not a huge difference. It's not like you're bouncing off walls. No, it's just focuses you and it makes you gather all your strengths. So this is Norway. They have great pantherina there, but problem with Norway is no one to gather that. There are no foragers in Norway because when the minimum salary requirement is so high that when you add this to extremely high shipping cost from Norway, this mushroom is going to be like worth their weight in gold. And I don't want that. I want it to be a very democratic product. I want this to be accessible product. Our product is 365 for 3 months. And then you don't need to come back to that. You can just stop because you already came to terms with your body and with your psyche. So it's $1 a year. That's the protocol. And then most people come back to it in about a year. Think about it as an ayahuasca journey, right? So you've done one journey. Some people come back a year after, some 2 years after, some never. Same thing here.
Well, where do you see the future of using Amanita in the US and in our Western culture going? Also, thank you for sharing all that history and that very interesting breakdown of the different areas it comes from. To me, I find that absolutely fascinating. And it's super cool that the stuff that you're using is being foraged or harvested and people are going out. This is a very traditional sort of situation where people are going out and foraging for these mushrooms in a way that's been passed down to them through generations of their family. I think that's super cool. And those are businesses that I personally like to try to support if possible. But given all of that, again, yeah, where do you foresee this going in the future? And is this something that could be a more widespread utilization across our culture? Is there a supply that's going to be able to meet a potential demand? Like, are there any conflicts there?
The supply is not a problem. The problem is the US government. The problem, not the government per se, the money. The problem is always the money, right? So I think that Amanita's future in the US is bleak because government cannot regulate it. They have no idea what to do with it. There were 12 Amanita studies in the US over the past 10 years. All of them were stopped because most of them were sponsored by Big Pharma. So all of them were stopped when Big Pharma realized that, you know what, we cannot replicate it. We cannot grow this mushroom in a lab. So we don't need it. Goodbye, next. They did muscimol, right? So one of the active components. But muscimol, the problem with it is the same as psilocin versus psilocybin mushroom, right? Psilocin is it's like LSD. It's one molecule. It's like one very shrill voice into your head. It's not for everyone. Mushrooms are quiet, right? So they're very gentle because they have so much happening there. One thing balances another thing. The same thing with cannabis. Why people don't react well to all the synthetic cannabis? Because it misses all the other cannabinoids and flavonoids that cannabis has. Same thing with Amanita. Amanita is not muscimol. Muscimol is just one small part of it. So what they want to do, they want to make muscimol because, and I understand that because something that gives you consistent results, right? But then once you do it, you're going to make it into what? Another antidepressant? All antidepressants at the end of the day, they all came from a natural thing, right? We didn't, I mean, chemistry doesn't exist on its own. It's all the part of nature. But I'm afraid that it's going to be exact same thing, pretty much because it's impossible to grow it in a contained environment. It's impossible. Government always wants to regulate nature. Does it happen? No. Can you regulate ayahuasca? Can you tell shamans, you know what? Your Icarus needs to be like this length, right? Your Icarus you can't do that. It's nature. It's very, and like every time we try to say, you know what, let's make our life very sufficient. Let's optimize everything. You cannot optimize a tree. A tree grows the way it grows. As humans, we're trying to optimize everything. We're trying to commoditize everything, but we can't. And maybe it's a beautiful thing. Maybe Amanita is not for everybody, right? So it's a natural medicine. It's very intuitive. You need to come to its soft embrace. Not everybody likes that. But it's, I think it's a beautiful thing that there is a market for everything. You can go to McDonald's, you can go to a Michelin restaurant, you can cook at home, you can have it all. So you can always find some. I think that there will be more people like I am, hopefully, people who work with producers there. I really hope that the war will end sooner than later, because then Russia actually does a great job on Amanita. There's a lot of companies starting every year. There are new companies and they do research. There are two countries that does best research on Amanitas, Russia and Japan. So hopefully, and Japan, funny enough, because in Japan there are no Amanita, they take the Amanita from Baltic countries. So this is where the supply that I actually worked with someone who is foraging for Japanese research centers, and they charge them a lot. Put it this way. So it's also very expensive to get mushrooms in Baltic countries. But hopefully, once the war is over, Russia is huge, Siberia is huge. You can have all the amanita you want, and amanita is a very kind mushroom. It's not like, oh, you know what, this year we didn't have enough amanita. We always do. There are some years when it's not as strong. Yes, it happens. Like, for example, when there's too much rain, then it gets diluted somewhat. So amanita, her properties are best compared with oysters, right? So the oyster needs to be in a very fresh and cool water to be tasty, right? Same thing with amanita. It needs, right now with the temperature growing, it gets a little bit, it's not as strong. People think that it's not as strong because it used to be, say, 500 years ago. But let me tell you, it's strong enough for our purpose. It's good enough. So yeah, but regulatory wise, I think that sooner or later, FDA is going to prohibit amanita. I'm pretty sure, because every time they don't understand something, they would prohibit it. Right now, amanita is in a gray area. It doesn't exist for FDA because FDA goes with the list that they released in 1991. So if the supplement is not there, it doesn't exist. In the same realm, lion's mane, another great mushroom, does not exist for FDA. So you can sell it, you can possess it, but you cannot claim that it does this or that. Only with SSRI, you can claim whatever you want.
You mentioned your protocol, and that's pretty extensive, and it's not only based for people who are dealing with anxiety and stress, but you also have a segment of your protocol that's used to help people with their professional development and in different areas of their life. And I think that's super cool that this medicine can be used in different facets of our life for different reasons. And I think ultimately that points to the fact of using it intentionally. Like with just about any sort of natural medicine, like the intention that you put into it, or any sort of healing modality for that matter, the intention that you put into it and your intentionality behind your actions is going to lead to the result. The more intentional you are and the more well thought out your process is, the cleaner and the easier it is for you going to be for you to be able to get to your desired outcome. And the fact that your process is so structured and there's so much thought and intention, and it's not a one size fits all. It's one of those things where you could have it for this, you could have it for this, you could have it for this, but there's different ways to use it in those different contexts. I think that's ultimately what's going to lead people to success in working with you and working with Amanita. But that's a very broad thing. That works with psilocybin, that works with cannabis, that works with all kinds of different plant medicines, having that foundation of intentionality and having a purpose for using it and having respect for it, which is something that you said as well. Having respect for this medicine. And I heard you mention and you referred to Amanita as she and her in this feminine. I don't personally have any experience with Amanita, but I have worked with a host of other natural plant medicines, and it's interesting how these different medicines have a gender's not quite the right word, but there's like a masculine or feminine quality to a lot of these different plant medicines traditionally. And I think that for a while with pharmaceuticals, it's very bland and like there's none of that. But in a traditional sense, that was very normal. And so I appreciate that you didn't outright say it, but there's a sense that it's got its own spirit and its own vibe, and I appreciate that. And that leads me to believe that you have a deep connection with it, because I've got that same sort of a connection with different plant medicines and different plants in general. So this conversation has just been really eye-opening for me. And every time we talk, I get more and more information and more data that I was not expecting, and data that's really good and potentially useful for a lot of people. And I can really say for the first time in my life that I'm somewhat interested, like just the way that you present it. And like you opened a door for me. I'll put it this way. You opened a door for me that had always been closed from the very beginning with Amanita. I was like, that's just not for me. Too many variables. Don't trust it. Like just too many question marks. And the way that you presented it and how you talk about it and just the depth that you've gone with it and how thorough you are in initially your own use of it, your own experimentation, your own development of that knowledge. You didn't just get this from a book. You tried all the different producers in the US, and then you went to Canada, and you're trying all these different sources. That information and that the wisdom that's gained from a process of self-experimentation and just learning by doing is so valuable. And I'm really grateful for you for sharing all this, because I know Amanita's a thing. People hear about it, and it is available in the US, and people can just order off a website. So I think it's really cool that you decided to share, and you spent the time to share all this wealth of knowledge about Amanita Muscaria, because yeah, like I said, I believe that there's a time and a place for everything, and having the proper education and understanding behind what you do and the substances and plant medicines or whatever it is that you work with, having that foundation of knowledge to back up your actions is going to lead to much better outcomes and much more favorable results. So as we start to wrap things up here, I'm curious, what's present with you now? And is there anything that you'd like to end this conversation with?
Yeah, so the mindfulness, I really liked that you noticed that aspect, right? It's not just the intention, it's also the mindfulness. But the interesting thing is, Amanita is actually capable of giving it back to you. And this is why Amanita is so tremendously successful of getting people off booze, off cannabis, if they have dependency, and off smoking. Like before going to Manita, I had not a dependency, but my connection with cannabis was a little bit too stronger than I'd like to, meaning it was on a daily basis. I needed it for sleep. And I got tired with that. And also, some countries you cannot travel to. And then I'd be like, okay, I cannot travel there because I cannot sleep. But it really helped me to regulate this relationship. So the interesting thing about those medicine is, yes, you need to start the dialogue by being present and by being respectful, but then you are going to get back that mindfulness. You are going to get back, like, I have a huge sweet tooth. So for me, it was absolutely normal. Yeah, another chocolate, another, almond croissant, another chocolate. But now my hand goes and my brain is like, we don't really want that. And that's a different thing, that we don't need that. We should not, we don't want to. So to me, mindfulness is when you can easily distinguish between false desires and real ones. And I think the benefit of pretty much every natural medicine is that it gives you understanding of who you are. So no matter which modality you choose, and everybody finds their modality, right? So for some people, it's ayahuasca. For me personally, it's bufo or mescaline, right? So ayahuasca, I love her. I'm scared of her. We have a very tempestuous relationship with her. So, right? But mescaline is always there for me. And yes, this is why I call Amanita she. This is a Latin name, right? So it's like I call my product Amanita Euphorida. So I imagine her as like this pretty young girl. But in Russian, Amanita is a male, because we have male and female, all the words like in Spanish. And in Russian, Amanita has a very distinct character of a grandfather. People always refer to it as a grandfather. So Siberian product is very male. It has very male energy. It's kind energy, but it's male. Ukrainian product has female energy. I have some clients, like sometimes I can get my hands on Siberian product. Like now I have maybe, I don't know, 200 capsules, something like that left. So sometimes some clients are testing both Ukrainian and Siberian, and the verdict is unanimous, male and female. So that's why my female Ukrainian mushrooms are Amanita, but Siberian is the grandfather, even though it's the same mushroom. But yeah, it's a fascinating little helper. It's really one of the most interesting things that you can discover for yourself. And it opens you a field of possibilities, right? You can try Blue Lotus and you can see what it's all about. And you can combine it with Amanita and see how your lucid dreaming will really, how you'll get there, right? Or you can try, I don't know, there's so much things that's happening, right? So many natural medicines, so many things that instead of just going to a pharmacy, you can go out.
Well, that's awesome. Working with these plant medicines and natural medicines as a tool to aid in self-discovery, I think ultimately it's something that you said way earlier in the conversation. Like it doesn't give you anything you don't already have. It helps to show you what's already there. And it seems like Amanita has a very unique way of helping shine that spotlight on the parts of us that we need to see, helping us diagnose the areas where we're potentially lacking, or where we could do some self-work, or where we're doing really good and we should continue to put energy into those areas. Such a fascinating conversation. I'm sure we could talk for a long time, and I so look forward to seeing where this goes, because this is a brand new thing for me, and having this conversation again has opened up a lot of doors, and I had several light bulb moments throughout this conversation. So please tell, if we could to wrap this up, tell me and let the people who listen know where they can find you, what your website is, and I'll link all that in the show notes. There will be all of your website and all your stuff will be there as well. But yeah, please share the best way for people to get a hold of you and get into contact with you.
My website is unidelics.com. So uni is UNI, and then delics as in psychedelics. And there's tons of information there. There's a section to learn about Amanita. There's an opportunity to schedule a free consultation with me. There's an opportunity to join WhatsApp group where you can have all things psychedelics, all things Amanita, and all things breathwork. You can also join a breathwork session. And there is also my blog that's called Tripping on Reads and Reels, where I cover books and movies and suggest some fun pairing with them.
Wow. Wow, that's a really cool idea. I'm going to have to check into that.
Please.
Wow. Yeah, Tatyana, thank you so much for your
Thank you so
time
much.
and for coming on and for sharing all your wisdom. I appreciate you so much, and I look forward to our next conversation and seeing how this all unfolds.
Absolutely. It's such a pleasure talking to you, and you always pick me up. You have such a great, happy energy, even via Zoom. It's very alive.
Yeah, you're most welcome.